everyone. It is CQ and Ron. We are here for the very anticipated interview with Dr. Turvey. I'm going to pass it to Ron to introduce Dr. Turvey. But before I do, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that is in our comments, that's watching the live. We really, really appreciate it. We are going to try our best to get to questions. We very much appreciate super chats, but we have so many questions, so we can't guarantee we'll get to everything or anything at all. We're just going to jump into it and utilize the time that we have with Dr. Turvey. We're so appreciative for this. And with that, I will pass it to Ron.
Hey, and I guess I should say aloha. Coming in from Maui. I was so excited about this. I've been looking forward to this. I actually delayed my brief vacation for a day so that I could do the interview, not be on the plane. So I'm at the hotel in Maui. I am so excited for this. We've been fans of Dr. Turvey since we saw. I guess we went through the rebuttal or the reply of Dr. Sutton to his report, which we haven't seen. But just from that little bit, we became huge fans of Dr. Turvey, and we could see such a difference in the quality of work between him and Dr. Sutton just from her response and the small quotes we had from him. Dr. Turvey is he's a forensic criminologist. He has a PhD in criminology. He has degrees in history, psychology, forensic science. He is with, Forensic Solutions LLC. He works major cases. That is primarily any cases involving death, sexual violence, or multiple victims. Major cases, big time public cases. Attorneys will call him. He's got so much experience and so much time that he has worked on these and seen. He's probably seen about everything, and he's worked on cases that have ended up eventually in pleas and verdicts being set aside. So we're really anxious. Now we're going to bring him up right now. He works on cases all over the country and all over the world. He's also senior forensic advisor to the Dubai Police Criminal Profiling Unit, in addition to all the other stuff he does. So we're very excited to welcome Dr. Turvey.
Hey, how you doing?
How you doing, Dr. Turvey? We're so excited to have you on.
Well, thank you for delaying for a week after my oral surgery. It's still not healed yet, so people can hear my lisp, I'm sure.
No worries. No worries. We're so happy to have you, Dr. Turvey.
I'm glad to be here.
Yep.
All right. So let's jump into it. I don't want to waste any time because we have such precious little time with Dr. Turvey, and I know that we personally probably have 100 questions, and that's not even considering everything that you guys have all sent to us one way or another. So we're gonna rip the Band-Aid off, Dr. Turvey. We're gonna go right to the meat and potatoes. And Taylor.
Perfect.
Let's start there. Go for it.
You first. What's the question?
Well, we all saw your response. So let's start there.
Well, let's start with what she said. I mean, I think that's a fair place. My response comes after her public sort of admonition. And it, for me, it's kind of, par for the course with that team, subsequent to the revelation of the plea agreement. How do I put this? I think I am fairly shocked, as is I think the world, that a defense attorney would come out publicly and admonish one of their own experts for discussing exculpatory evidence for their client. And it begs the question as to whether or not she's representing Koberger or something else. So, because that's not in his best interests. His best interests obviously are served by full disclosure of all exculpatory evidence and testing of all potentially exculpatory evidence. And that's all any expert should be, advocating for. If you're advocating for truth and justice and full disclosure and transparency, which are sort of the hallmarks of good scientific practice, that's what you're advocating for. And when you hire somebody like me, that's what you're saying to the world. Hey, we're bringing in independent experts who are independent, who are going to give us advice about what evidence exists and what evidence does not exist, what evidence should be tested, and what evidence might be beneficial to understanding the full narrative of the case. And the idea that you would leave physical evidence untested that has potential exculpatory value is shocking. It shocks the conscience. And so the idea that you would admonish somebody for saying, hey, there's this really important piece of untested evidence that we need to talk about, that's sort of, again, it's problematic, and it raises real questions for me. But let me explain something else. Let's flip it and say it this way. What would it say about an expert that you hired who sat on exculpatory evidence and didn't say anything publicly, and later on that evidence was discovered and tested and exculpated a client or a defendant? What would you say about the entire team of experts that said nothing and sat blithely by while the judicial machine sort of steamrolled the defendant?
Would not think very highly of them.
What?
I would not think very highly of them at all.
Exactly. So while in this moment, there are people who are chagrined by this discussion of publicly available material, I am more concerned about those who would rather suppress it.
And is it safe to say, Dr. Turvey, that this is the first time a defense attorney in a case that you've worked on has come out and made such a statement?
I've never seen it before in any case, ever, in my 30-year history. I mean, if you can name that case, I'd love to know.
No,
I've seen experts for the state and for the defense who've come out and made massive blunders, massive errors, massive failure to disclose misconduct, incorrect interpretations, looking at photographs upside down and interpreting them incorrectly. That happens all the time. And you never see a defense attorney coming out and blasting them for it. Or even the state often might do it a little bit, but not the defense, not their own expert. So it really starts to beg the question, what is the purpose of hiding this evidence? What is the purpose of not wanting to discuss it? And to be very clear, the sort of the admonishment is generic. It's only that I'm discussing things, not that I'm wrong, not that I'm lying, not that I'm incompetent, not that I am biased, or not that I am doing something that violates a court order. None of that is happening. If it were true that I were violating her confidentiality agreement, there would be severe and immediate legal consequences, as there should be. All right. The problem is Brady versus Maryland, which is the Supreme Court ruling, which states that you can't you have to disclose everything that is potentially exculpatory, and the person who decides that is not the prosecution nor even the judge necessarily. It's usually, if the judge is going to make that determination, they do it in camera, alone, in their chambers or whatever. But generally, you're supposed to disclose everything that's potentially exculpatory and let the defense do their own investigation of it. So everything that I've discussed has already been disclosed by the state. She's just unhappy that I'm discussing it for some reason, and then put me on blast with the other two attorneys to sort of, I think her attempt was to try to say, well, the last line says it all, which is his credibility should be viewed through this lens or whatever. And I think it should be. I think my credibility should be viewed through that lens, which is, will I knowingly sit on exculpatory evidence? No, I will not, despite whatever consequences might come. And I have, at any given time, I have between 35 and 40 open cases. I just finished a huge report in a big case today. Spent the last 2 weeks working on it. And my clients hire me for that objectivity, for that impartiality, and because they know that I have a reputation for having integrity in front of a jury and in front of the court. And I have to say, it really begs the question as to the credibility of those experts or those attorneys or those participants or those commentators who are arguing for the suppression of this evidence. That's interesting to me. But there are no specific, she's made no specific allegations of specific information. And I think I know why that is. So.
And that was
it's also interesting that she hasn't spoke up since the, following the plea, which was almost getting close into that year mark. I thought that was interesting. But you're 100% right. She doesn't try to discredit you. She doesn't try to say that you're wrong. She basically just says she's also attacking her own team, which is wild. I mean, that's kind of, you have the whole world trying to attack you for the most part, and you're trying to prove BK's innocence, but hey, let's start attacking our own, which was so
interesting. Think about what it's going to do to her. I mean, remember this, she's not like this clean defense attorney. She's got a conflict of interest starting out of the gate because she represented victim family members when she was working for the public defender. But she also has she worked as a magistrate and a prosecutor, I think, at some point. People who do these things as lawyers, they get confused sometimes about their role. They get confused, and their attitude and their posture doesn't change sufficiently when they change their role or their onus. What is their onus? Is their onus to the defense, to their client, to the state, to the people who elected them, whatever? They get confused. And so when you have this, what we call role strain, when you have multiple roles pulling on you, you can wind up saying and doing things that you probably shouldn't. What I'm also thinking about is any person who would ever think of working as an expert for Ann Taylor in the future is probably going to say no.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that the first time you heard this admonishment was publicly. You haven't had any direct contact with her since before the plea?
Sam, this was a great question. The answer is no, of course not. I mean, if you were going to, let me back up and say this. If you were going to admonish an expert for some behavior, you would probably want to talk to them first about what they did and why, and specifically what they did and why, as part of what's going on. But our relationship dramatically deteriorated once she made this surprise plea deal, which surprised most of the team. Well, there's a guilt phase, and then there's a mitigation phase in the death penalty case. And the mitigation experts, we never met them. And even the guilt phase experts who were trying to reconstruct the crime or determine the events and the actions, we didn't talk to each other. We were very much compartmentalized. So I wouldn't even have anything to share from them other than the findings that are in the defense autopsy report. There's not an autopsy evaluation done by a defense expert. And I have access to that, but I obviously haven't shared that with anybody.
That's a perfect lead into, I think, the next question. I know that this is something I'm super interested in, and most people in this chat are as well. How did you get involved with this case, Dr. Turvey?
Well, I mean, it's not a secret that I was hired, so I can certainly discuss that. It's not a secret that I wrote a report, nor are my findings a secret because they were publicized in January with all the disclosures. In fact, there was an article written about my findings in Fox News back in January 2025, I think. 2025. And I was one of the only experts whose findings were disclosed to the public. How did I get involved? Well, I was, I would say, collegial, good friends and collegial with Becca Barlow, who was hired on early on as a DNA expert. I worked a case with her in California. And she asked to bring me on to evaluate the placement of the scabbard, all right? Because they were concerned that there's evidence that it was planted because of the things that have all come to light. And then once I did that, once I was brought on board for that, they expanded my role and they expanded my analysis to a full crime scene analysis so that we could make determinations with certainty. And remember, I prepared a report in this case, which was submitted to Ann Taylor, I think, at least twice. One evening I was traveling, I was working really late, and I submitted it. We had a deadline we were coming up against in January of 2020, whatever it was, 2025. And I had to meet that deadline. And so she reviewed it, she accepted it, and she put it on file. So these findings that I've given and the extent and breadth of my examination are not some great mystery or some great reduction as she tried to suggest in her admonition, which was bizarre. Trying to pretend, oh, well, he's just this guy. We just kind of hired him and just kind of did this. And you didn't vet me completely. You didn't ask for a report, didn't expand my role, didn't request a report that was X number of pages long and, submit that to the court as true and just and accurate. I mean, come on. It defies credibility. Her posture at this point defies credibility. So that's how I got involved. And that was the nature and range and scope of my examination, quite extensive.
And do you recall exactly what time frame was it that you were actually hired on as the expert?
What would be like in, man, I don't remember. Let me just take a look. I can tell you right now. I can tell you. Let me go here. Let me just make sure I don't say anything wrong. All right. So I was brought in October 2024, but I was interviewed multiple times, at least twice before then, to screen me. And my report was submitted in January 22nd, 2025. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps quite a bit.
Yep.
So I know that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of complaints by Ann Taylor to the court about a defense being slow to give evidence over. Did that kind of put the defense team
the prosecution, not the defense, the prosecution?
The prosecution turning him over to the defense, yeah. Did that kind of put the defense under the gun a bit?
Not just that. I mean, right before the plea, we got this massive data dump that had not been disclosed to us prior, and that I have not seen, and have not examined. We had to do a whole. No, of course not, because the plea happened right after that. So when I left her office the last time, the weekend before the Thursday before the weekend of the plea agreement being announced, we had all kinds of plans set in motion, as you would, because we were going to trial, and all kinds of plans for examining those disclosures, all kinds of plans for other examinations for other items of evidence to check on chain of custody and things like that. There was a bunch of work to be done. That is not some secret. That disclosure of that data dump requires examination by the experts. So there's no.
Do you know what was in that data dump?
I didn't look at it.
Well, no. I mean, did they say?
Nope.
Here are photos, here are videos. Nothing. You just.
No.
Wow.
No, she was not like that. So she wasn't. She the version of Ann Taylor that I know bears no resemblance to the Ann Taylor that took the plea and is talking in public right now. I don't know this person at all. I don't recognize her at all.
Well, when you last met with her, you had no indication that the plea was gonna happen. And how did you actually find out about the plea? Through the media? I
found out from a colleague. The colleague texted me and said, "Hey Brent, I remember you were working on this case. I remember reading the articles. I remember this. I remember you mentioning it. What's going on? There's a plea agreement. Is that true?" And I wrote back immediately, "No way, no way. There's a plea. There's no way. It's not happening." And then over the next 10 minutes, it was like bing, 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 bing. I was getting all kinds of text messages from different colleagues and different friends of mine, and people who work for me. We all found out with the rest of the world.
Is it normal? Oh, is it normal?
Go ahead,
sorry.
No, I was just saying. Last time we talked, you were renting like a VRBO. You had bags. You had your clothes. Like you were ready to go.
Yeah, of course. But let me back up and say something that hasn't been said before. One, the reason I was hired for this case is I was one of the only people on the whole case who's ever worked a mass homicide before. I've worked dozens. Well, a dozen or more. Somewhere between 12 and 20. If you look at my resume, you can go count them. That's the first thing. And I'm working a couple right now. Actually, I just picked up another one the other day. So that's one of the reasons I was brought in, because I have expertise and experience on these kinds of complex mass homicide events. All right. The second thing is that when you are on a death penalty case, it is intensive. Everybody's heads are in the huddle. Okay. Everybody is part of the process, because if they're not, you can miss something. And the consequences are life and death. So there's a lot of great articles on the death penalty issue and the work that's required and the focus that's required. And what they say is, quote, "Death is different," unquote. So when you have a death penalty case, you are responsible in a way that you're not in other cases, right? Because there's going to be appeals and there's going to be, you can do it, and then you can get a second chance. You can get a couple more bites at the apple if there's a problem, or if there's a procedural error or an innocence issue. In a death penalty case, it's dangerous. So that means there has to be a very high level of trust and communication between the people working on the case. And the fact that none of the defense experts were contacted or consulted as part of this deal, in fact, were misled by the defense attorneys as to whether or not there was going to be a plea deal, is stunning. It's a stunning context to be in. I've only experienced this kind of thing one time before, sort of, but this is pretty stunning.
How were you misled?
What?
How were you misled? Exactly.
Well, as I said, the entire posture of the case was going to trial. And that changed on the weekend and was announced to the world without being discussed among anyone. And, there's a lot of ways to describe that, but one is just, it's misleading everybody else to let them think that there's one pathway that's happening, and that causes them to to engage in activity or make decisions and choices and planning and protocol and logistics surrounding that, and action plans that cause them to do massive amounts of work and commit to certain time frames, and then to sort of have the rug pulled out from underneath you for some reason without any explanation, then or now, as to why. Misleading is a gentle way of saying it. Misleading is a kind word.
So you don't have any information since the time the plea was entered as to what changed or why they went that direction.
Well, I directly asked that question, and I was told nothing. Nothing changed.
Was Hippler or the court, were they encouraging the negotiations regarding the plea deal, or there's so many different theories that we've all heard online. Some that Hippler was encouraging the two sides to mediate, see if they can come to a plea deal, or was it just completely like you had no clue that these negotiations? It sounds like to me you had no clue that these negotiations were going to go down that weekend.
None at all, and it's none at all, and that sort of. In my perspective, and Ann Taylor doesn't have that much experience working death penalty cases. I do. I've done this many, many years, 30 years now. And in my experience, it is completely inappropriate to start making major decisions like that without first getting a sense of where the evidence really is at and having a team meeting and talking about it. And that didn't happen. I will just say this. Without betraying any confidence, I can say that I asked multiple times. I asked at least twice and was given a third version of events. Every single time there was a discussion about this after the fact, I got a different answer as to what the precise sequence of events was. And in a normal case, like I said, I have clients that I've worked with for 10, 15 years. I got clients who I work with constantly on every case they work. I got clients who I trust them to do anything with me. I trust them to watch my kids. I trust them to watch my cats. I trust them with everything, because over time and temperance, you learn sort of the ethical character of the people you're working with, and that's why you work with them again, because you don't have any problems with the way they conduct themselves, and you know that when you're not in the room, the best evidence and the best ethical posture is going to be taken. In this case, I have zero faith and confidence in Ann Taylor in terms of her posture, because every single time I've spoken with her, she's given a different version of events about whether and why and how. And so at this moment, I can't violate any privilege with you because I don't know what the truth is, because I have not been told the truth yet that I can tell. I've been given 3 different versions of events relating specifically to your question. When did the deal start? When did they start? How did they get Brian to agree to it? And the involvement of Hippler. And I'm not a legal expert. I know what my role is, and I won't know what my onus is to. I know that my first onus is to being first we start with, you have to do your due diligence in every case, because that's what satisfies due process, and due process is a requirement of the Constitution. If you don't follow that logic, you have no business being an expert or being involved in the criminal justice system. Due diligence equals due process equals constitutionality. Okay, I don't know. That's the extent of my sort of my grasp of my situation or my role. And I don't know what the legal realities are around Dan Taylor taking this case. I don't know what the legal realities are of whether or not Hippler was involved and how he was involved, the judge or the prosecutor. And I suspect that it was done in such a way that was problematic, which is why I'm getting 3 different versions. All right, that's the problem. So I'm not disclosing anything because I got nothing to disclose. I just don't know what the truth is. I'm as stunned, shocked, and appalled as the rest of you, which is why I was happy to discuss the publicly disclosed elements of this case as they relate to chain of custody for the sheath and as they relate to the untested DNA evidence from the hair found in Ethan's hand. All of this was obscured in different ways. And so bringing that to light is actually not a violation, it's a responsibility. And if you don't think that's your responsibility, please, God, stay out of this profession.
We're going to get there. Absolutely. But I got something, because I'm an appellate attorney. I do primarily civil appeals, family law and so forth, but I certainly understand the appellate process. And I know that with criminal appeals, one big avenue for challenging even a plea is ineffective assistance of counsel. Now, as I understand it, a lot of times defense attorneys are almost encouraging of their clients, hey, you need to pursue this. You need to look at ineffective assistance of counsel, get with an appellate attorney or post-judgment attorney.
Yeah.
Is that your experience in general?
Let's just talk in general, not about this particular case.
Okay.
So that we can dial in. All right. In general, I am often called in appellate contexts for major cases, death penalty cases or, LWOP, life without parole cases, to do a review to determine whether or not, let's say, for example, if the attorney had hired an expert such as myself at the time of the trial, using those standard practices, using those protocols and procedures that are available at the time, using the science available at the time, would they have discovered the evidence that was missed? That's one of the reasons why I have a library that's worth about 30 grand, because I collect old forensic and investigative textbooks, because sometimes I'm asked to go back to 1970. Sometimes I'm focused on 1980. Sometimes it's 2005. What were the practice standards at the time? So this is a very normal involvement for me. We call it IAC, Ineffective Assistance of Counsel. And if you can demonstrate that the attorney was ineffective in terms of hiring experts or using experts or investigating evidence, it's a big deal. Like, for example, I do a lot of casework in Kansas, and they had I can't remember the stupid the case, but it was a case involving a cell phone evaluation. And the defense attorney did not have the cell phone extracted and examined. It was sitting in police holding. And when the appellate attorney got involved, they found a bunch of stuff on it, apparently. And so they used that. They took that all the way to the Supreme Court of Kansas, who ruled that negligent failure to engage an expert to examine critical evidence is actually a reversible error, evidencing ineffective assistance of counsel. So your question is apropos, and it is absolutely relevant to the present case that we're in. Imagine, again, an expert who did not want to have that hair tested, right? How do you argue that?
I think we all shit our pants when we read that in Chris's book. Excuse me,
Wow.
That's literally what I think most of us did. We were all reading it together till late hours of the night, texting each other, going, "There's hair in his fist."
It's not just that there's hair in his hand, okay? Because this is really important to understand the context. I'm glad we're bringing this up. The hair in the hand was described in investigative and forensic reports as debris. There's no debris. Debris indicates like multiple different types of small, sort of maybe commercial material, maybe hair, maybe dust, maybe pieces of paint or carpet, things like that. Bunch of different stuff, debris, okay? This was just a clump of hair in Ethan's right hand. And the hand slipped down into the space between the mattress and the wall. And the blood went down his arm, and it glued the hair to his hand, and it glued this more hair to the actual bed frame. And I didn't know it was there because it wasn't in the reports and it wasn't being discussed until I actually went to Moscow and examined the evidence. I examined the bed frame myself and all the other evidence in the case.
Can you walk us through that when you went to the locker with, I think Payne escorted you, right?
They were all there. We had you know, everybody was there. We had Payne and another guy, and we had the defense investigator taking pictures, and I took pictures, and you know, this is not some secret I billed for it. Somebody can want to go look at it. They can see it's in my report that I actually went there and documented everything before I came to my conclusions. And one of the things I found was this huge amount of blood with a bunch of hair, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And they're like, oh yeah, that's the hair. So it was not evident in the documentation it wasn't evident in the documentation that I had, nor in the investigative reports, nor in the autopsy report. It was written in such a way to obscure that fact, which in my view is problematic. And of course, at the time, everybody else thought it was problematic too. So this is not secret. This is something that everybody knows. It was submitted to the FBI for macroscopic, not microscopic, but macroscopic examination, which means looking at the physical features of the hair, the length, the color, the shape, the curls, all that good stuff that you can describe. And they excluded it as coming from Brian Koberger. In other words, they could tell this did not belong to Brian Koberger. Wrong color, too long, all that good stuff. Okay? Now, the next question is, let's test it and find out whose it is. Nobody wanted to test it. And that is also not secret because it was never tested. Because it was never tested, we can infer that nobody wanted it tested, not either side.
So Anne did not want that tested? Anne did not want that hair tested?
Well, it didn't get tested, and she knew about it. So that's the inference. There's no violation of privilege here. This is something that we know existed, didn't get tested, and they knew about it. So
did you suggest that it should be tested?
Vehemently, multiple times. It was even one of the last things I said as I was walking out the door. I will just tell you this in general. I would not want to be on the stand with such a piece of evidence untested. I would not to be on the stand having to explain why. If the prosecution had, well, Dr. Turvey, if this was such an important piece of evidence, why wasn't it tested? That would be a death blow to testimony.
Did you ever get an explanation why the defense did not have it tested?
No.
Wow.
I have the same response because there's a lot of people wonder, did she know about this? Did she get this? How much discovery did she have? But it's very clear that she knew this hair existed. She knew that it should have been tested. Yes. I could only imagine what you felt inside when you saw that at the evidence locker. I mean, if I was prosecution, I wouldn't want that tested either.
Well, I don't just so you know, I don't have those I'm not a regular person. I don't have those kinds of feelings. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. And I know I can kind of, how do I say it? I have sort of the Cassandra syndrome problem where I know what's coming. I know what's going to happen next. And either you believe me and take action, which is why you hired me in the first place, or you don't believe me and then you suffer the consequences. Cassandra syndrome is where you're doomed to know the future but not be believed when you tell it. So when I see this, I don't sit there and go, oh my God, I don't have those kinds of responses. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Let's make a note of that and circle back later on, and we'll have a conversation. I don't get excited like a schoolgirl over stuff like that. I get sky like a little schoolgirl over my cats.
We're the same way with family law. You get a little jaded, unfortunately, for doing it as long as we do.
Here's the thing. It's not about being jaded for me, because what I have learned is this. I have learned that my inept little fingers should not be in charge of anything. My inept little fingers can make things worse if I don't have all of the information. So I'm not jaded. What I do get is disappointed. If I were jaded, I would stop doing this work. I think it's important. I think it's necessary. And I like to work with competent, ethical people. But what happens is I get disappointed by people who don't tell me the truth.
So I just want to
expect me to keep their secrets, which I'm not going to do.
I want to just kind of close the loop on that hair that was found in Ethan's hand. Sure. You said that it was excluded as Koberger's. Was it excluded as to any of the victims or any of the residents of the house as well?
It was never compared to anyone else in the house. In fact, I'll give you another reality check here, which is that as we are all learning, we don't know all the people who were in the house that night. We don't know. We don't have that list. We know who claimed to live there, or who were legitimately there, but we don't know who all the visitors were. We don't know where people were sleeping necessarily up until the moment of the attack.
Were there
And-
any
and just-
other notable characteristics of the hair that was found?
Yeah.
What were they?
It was about that long. This was that long, and it was a blonde, reddish, sort of sandy brown. And I didn't look at the macroscopic detail, but the macroscopic detail that they were able to discern, other macroscopic detail, eliminated it from being Kohberger's. Kohberger's hair is short and black, right? This is medium length, and blondish sandy brown. More than that, you don't need. All you need is 1 point of difference, and you're done. So,
was there sufficient substance to that hair that DNA testing could have been done from it?
it's a fun question. I don't know because I didn't examine it. What you're asking, I think, Ron, is whether or not there were roots, right?
Yeah.
Roots can give you one kind of DNA, but it's hair. Hair has mitochondrial DNA. You can test it for mitochondrial DNA, if you just have the shaft. These do that all the time in other cases. So yeah, if you've even got a little fragment of hair, you can test it for DNA. Not a confirmatory amount to identify a person or a source, but you can exclude people.
Sounds like
Wow.
potentially a female's hair.
Well, I'll tell you this. I will divulge this. When other people saw it, not me. When other people saw it, they thought it was a female's hair. And I thought, okay, well, that's a good theory. It's also possibly a male's hair because men wear their hair different ways. I don't think like that, but let's not guess. That's what I always say. Hey, let's not guess.
Let's test it.
Let's test it and find out. There are people who will say, and I don't mean to impugn lawyers, but there are many lawyers who are not as, we'll say, enlightened or motivated or competent as you. And they will say, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. That's the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard. That's something from TV and movies. In reality, if you are trying to find out what's happening in your case, you need to test the evidence that's relevant. You don't ever want to go into court not knowing the answer to those questions. You don't want surprises in court. You want to go in, like the value of me, for example, is you call me in and I'll tell you both the strengths and the weaknesses of your case. You're going to know from where the blade will fall. All right. And that is much more important than me going in and going, rah, 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 you're so great. Your guy's innocent. I don't do that. That's nonsense. That's not going to help you.
Waste of money.
It's not going to help you at all. I go in there and I say, here's what they got. Here's what it means. And here's what you need to do to figure out whether or not it's accurate.
Do you know where that hair is still today? Is it still sitting in the evidence locker? Does Ann Taylor have access to get that hair tested should she want to at this point?
I don't know the answer to the logistical question is where it's at right now. Couldn't tell you. It would be standard practice for the FBI to return the hair to the Moscow PD. They have the custody of that hair. The court can demand testing at any time if they wanted to, just like the court could demand an allocution in this case, which they didn't do, which is actually required to make sure you're not having a false confession. And I want to make that point really quickly before I lose it. And that is that fully more than 25% of the cases that are worked by the Innocence Project involve innocent people confessing to crimes they didn't commit at the urgence of their attorney. Just remember that statistic. It's pretty important.
I think it's important that you brought that up right now. In fact, there's other hair that was also found upstairs as well. And one of those clumps of hair supposedly had bloody roots as well. Is that true?
I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
But I mean, there have been, like I said, there have been tons of disclosures on this case subsequent to the plea. And once the plea occurred, my involvement was over.
Okay. Yeah, it actually was. I think it was in Chris's book that there was hair found both next to Maddie and next to Kaylee, which one of which might have had bloody roots, and which also was not consistent with any of the people in the house or with Brian Koberger. So that's not something that you saw, though, right?
That's not something I examined. I was focused on sort of reconstructing the events of the evening, focusing on the sheath, which was clearly, sort of intentionally placed where it was, well after the crime occurred and blood had dried, and focusing on the staging elements, focusing on the timeline of events and the different methods of killing that were involved and the different weapons that were involved. So
now we're going to get to the knife sheath because I know everybody wants to talk about that, but really quick with respect to the allocution, because I don't want to lose my train of thought.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, I think we were all pretty shocked that Brian didn't have to provide any details regarding the who, what, when, where, why of these crimes. Other than him simply admitting guilt, he provided no additional information. Is this consistent with other cases that you've worked on?
No, not only not consistent, it's entirely improper. It would be setting the stage for a great miscarriage of justice without having some confirmatory information to demonstrate because there's no actual direct evidence of his involvement at the crime or the crime scene. We don't have that. So what we need from any defendant in this case would be an explanation of what was done, how it was done, and that explanation should lead to corroborating evidence. And if it doesn't, then we have a problem. And the reason why it matters is because, again, that statistic I cited, which is that almost a third of cases involve clients or defendants that are pushed to take a plea that are actually innocent because they feel like they don't have an advocate or don't have any support, and but at the time they make they accept the plea, they are alone in the world and mentally deteriorated to the point of giving up. So
that's something the three of us have talked about quite a bit. I don't even think we were aware of how many people take a guilty plea for those reasons you just described.
It's a lot. And that's why people like me have a job in that part of the criminal justice realm and the appellate realm. Now, again, I worked a case one time in Colorado, for example. A guy completely confessed to killing somebody. All right. Come to find out, that person was still alive. He got arrested. He got charged. The guy he confessed to killing was still alive. All right. If a person is going to take a plea, then they must allocute. And that allocution requires that they give details of the crime that nobody else has so that they can be certain that they are confessing to a crime that they actually committed. Not like let's say in Latin America, for example, people people will plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit for money and serve the time for wealthy people. That happens a lot.
Have you seen any cases that have been set aside after the fact or appealed or habeas corpus based on ineffective assistance of counsel for the lack of requirement of allocution?
No, because again, it would not be allowed to happen. No, nobody would allow that to happen. This happened. This case is replete with first times, with outlandish and bizarre occurrences that don't occur in other places. And I think we're forgetting that even though Idaho is part of the United States isn't a country of all these places that get along with the same rules and laws. It's a series of little fiefdoms where people control the narratives, where people can decide when the law gets applied and where. And it's not like we think. And I know because I work in all these, there are places I won't testify anymore. I won't testify in Mississippi, for example. I won't testify. I won't go there and work cases. There are other places I won't go in the world because I know that the justice system is not reliable or ethical. And participating in it actually makes it look like they're being reliable and ethical when they're not. So there are places I will not lend my name to. But Idaho apparently is running its own little system there that's not abiding by sort of the criminal justice norms in death penalty cases that I can tell.
And you've worked on it sounds like quite a few cases where there was either DNA or some other evidence that led to someone being exonerated, exculpatory evidence, and they're out now.
Yeah, many. I worked on a case just a few months ago where my report. It's Kansas versus Julius Beasley. You can look it up. It was just 2 months ago, and I had prepared a report in that case a year ago, showing the crime scene was staged and the police had the wrong person. They arrested this homeless woman's boyfriend for stabbing her to death, and I was able to prove the crime scene was staged. The body was moved. She was killed somewhere else and dumped there, and all the elements were there for that. They didn't like that, but they also found out that other people had confessed to the crime, describing it exactly as I had in my report. And so my report, I wound up doing a second report showing that the police had gone back and tried to scrape over everybody who had given information that was exculpatory and hide video evidence and all this good stuff. They were, so the court, the DA actually, a new DA got assigned the case, read both of my new reports and was like, we can't take this to trial. He's not the guy. And they let him out. So I never think, but I don't think in those terms. I think in terms of what happened. All right. And a lot of the cases I work that are appellate cases, we get people exonerated. You can go through my resume. You can see the cases I've worked where charges have been dismissed in death penalty cases or murder one cases. You can see the cases where people have been exonerated because of my testimony and that sort of thing. And you can also, you may not know, but I've also worked quite a bit for the police and for attorney general's offices in different parts of the world, assisting with prosecutions and assisting with keeping the right people in jail and keeping the wrong people from going to jail. So the world is full of ethical attorneys and ethical investigators and ethical prosecutors, and sometimes they do the right thing when the evidence is presented to them in the right way.
Suppose an appellate attorney came to you on behalf of Brian. We don't know if he's talked with anybody or if that's in the works or anything. But let's suppose that an appellate lawyer came and talked to you and wanted to see, or maybe with another expert, do you have any evidence, any thing that you can offer that you think would provide good grounds for this being set aside in some manner? Would you have a lot to give them?
Well, yes, my report. My report and the report of every other guilt phase expert working on the case. So every guilt phase expert submitted a report that lines up with mine, every one of them. So what I'm telling you is this is a bizarre occurrence that comes way out of left field with no change in the status of the evidence that appears to point every arrow away from Brian Kohlberger. I would say this. I will say it another way. Often in cases like this, I anticipate a future involvement being called at the ineffective assistance of counsel hearing for the attorneys involved. Mm-hmm. Because again, we started out talking about this, can you imagine a situation where a forensic expert was involved directly in trying to conceal exculpatory evidence from the defendant? Can you imagine that? I'm not gonna live that life. That's not gonna work. I have to make sure that everyone understands it. And the other problem is there's nobody talking to Kohlberger except for his family and his attorney, which is still Ann Taylor, which again is, I think, a little problematic, but that's not my call.
That's a lot of problematic. That's a lot. I really hope his family at some point sees that maybe they should be talking to someone else at some point.
I don't know how that'll happen. If she's controlling everything and access to him, which appears to be what's going on. We talked about this in the pre-interview, and that is that I don't know what Mr. Kohlberger knows or does not know. I don't know what he's been provided or not. I don't know how he's been provided that. I don't have any information about that. What I do know is, in general, when you're working especially on a death penalty case, you have to have a defendant who's actively involved and capable of participating in their defense because they are the decision maker. In this case, what do we got? The argument was, I didn't make this argument. This was a public argument made by Ann Taylor, so it's not a secret. I think she thinks everything she says is a secret. It's not. The reality is that the argument was he had mental health issues. He was not. He was mentally infirm in a lot of different ways and had different disabilities that he was dealing with. That was her presentation to the world. If you accept that as truth, then it's difficult to see how he could participate meaningfully in his defense. even
And-
if given all the information. What?
Just to clear up, because I think you kind of already said it, but it wouldn't be standard practice for you to ever communicate within the scope of your role as an expert with Brian, but you never had communication with Brian.
No, let's make this very clear. I get asked because a lot of times I get confused for a psychologist. A lot of times judges and attorneys, they confuse my role for that as a psychologist. I had a report today that the client wanted me to write about the psychological impact of X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not a psychologist. You hire a psychologist for that. I don't talk to defendants unless I absolutely have to. I've done it maybe in 30 years. I've done it maybe 8 times, maybe. And that's only to go over facts and details at a crime scene to help me understand what happened when they were already stating there was like a self-defense case. And they're saying, this is what happened. Let me show you how. That makes sense. I don't go interview serial killers. I don't go interview mass murderers. I don't interview defendants. I don't collect, mugs and photographs of myself with people. I'm not a trophy collector. That's sick to me. My job is to keep myself objective to the physical evidence. And if I make connections with or communicate with or relationships with defendants, that can get in the way of my objectivity. That's number one. But number two, and this is why I like talking to you guys, because you're legal minds. What happens if I go talk to a defendant in the lockup and he discloses everything to me and then I go on the stand and testify? What happens?
It compromises your report and your role as an expert.
No
Worse.
privilege.
There's no privilege. There's no privilege. There you go. Sam gets the most points for not going over.
And didn't I think when we talked at the pregame, didn't Anne want you to go talk to him by yourself? Like not even necessarily in her presence?
Yeah, I would assume it would be in her presence or with the investigator or something, but multiple times I was asked if I wanted to meet with him and I explicitly said no. I don't do that. That's not what I do. You need me to be completely objective and focused on the physical evidence, not on anything to do with what Mr. Koberger has to say. And
Do you think that there was any intentional reason behind her wanting you to speak with Koberger?
Oh yeah, the whole thing, again, this is part of the misleading me. She wanted to convince me he was innocent. And I said to her, I don't care. When I'm on the stand, and this is not, again, it's not a secret. I will tell this to any client who hires me. If you put me on the stand and ask me, what do you think of so-and-so? I will say the same thing. I don't care. I don't care about Brian Koberger. I don't care about any of the other people involved. I don't care about anybody. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to get a date. I'm not here to get political clout. I am here to represent the physical evidence in the trial. I am here to be an objective voice for the physical evidence that exists and does not exist. That's what I do. That's the value that I bring. If I can't do that, then I have no real value, is my opinion.
And we'll get into all your scientific-based conclusions at the end, but I know there's so many comments, so many people want to know. Can we just give them a little taste of what you believe the evidence has shown with respect to him being guilty?
Well, first of all, he is guilty legally. Guilt is a legal posture. He stated that he was guilty in court, and the court basically said, "Yep, you're guilty, and here's your sentence." Okay, so from a legal posture, he's legally guilty. Here's the problem, and this is the conflation of things. You can be legally guilty and factually innocent. Happens all the time. You can be factually guilty and legally innocent. Happens all the time. Okay, so the legal posture is you're guilty. Okay, that legal posture can change. It is not, how do I put this? The law can be negotiated, but science cannot. Okay, the law is negotiated. Well, I'll say it the same way I said this in West Memphis back in the day, back in the long time ago when I was young and had no beard and was much fatter. There's no physical evidence that suggests that Brian Koberger is responsible for this crime. That's all you got. That's all I can say. There's no physical evidence which suggests Brian Koberger is responsible for this crime. And anybody who says differently is twisting themselves into a pretzel with unconfirmed circumstantial theories they've created in their head. And by the way, that's why the prosecution was very clearly interested in making a deal.
Doesn't
Very well.
explain why the defense made the deal.
Nope. Does not.
All right, let's get into the knife sheath. Let's get into that. Sam, you wanna start us off with that section?
Yeah, I mean, well, I just want to hear from you, Dr. Turvey. What happened? How did you first go, there's an issue with the sheath? Because that's one of the biggest pieces of quote unquote evidence that everyone's talking about, that the prosecution has always pointed at Brian about.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's quite a few problems. And the first one is its placement. It is very clearly underneath one of the victim's thighs, sticking out, covered by a comforter, and very evident when you look at it in the photographs. It's hard to miss. But the problem is the knife sheath itself is clean, for lack of a better word. It's not been used. So that's the first thing. There's no usage. It's not like somebody wore it on their belt, and not like somebody scratched it or pulled things in and out, pulled a knife in and out of it. It's pristine, other than a couple little areas of flecks of blood. So that's the first problem. One, its placement, the location. You can't drop it and find it in that spot, and you can't. There's no evidence of usage of the sheath, and there's no evidence of any massive bloody transfer, which would be expected. If somebody slid that under there, that person would have the bloody hands. We assume, and we infer that it would have bloody hands, and there would be blood on it. There's no blood like that on it. No transfer from hands. And only a little bit of spatter, but it's on top of a sheet that is covered with a star field of blood spatter. Okay, and that blood spatter is not. How do I put it? And this is, again, it's not secret. This has all been revealed. This has all been revealed over and over again. It's just a question of putting it together. The sheet itself has no transfer from that blood on the sheet to the top of the sheath as it slid into that position. And none of those transfers are smeared, which means it happened after the blood dried. That's the first set of problems we got. The second thing is, it was originally observed to be on the floor by Taylor at the crime scene. All right, much later on. And then finally, of course, after I'd written my report, we had done a very good job was done of going through some chain of custodies, and I was given this chain of custody. Said, Turvey, what do you think? Because we think it's a problem, but maybe you have a different opinion because you're a forensic scientist and we're not. What do you think? And I'm like, this chain of custody has been falsified. People go to jail for that. They get put on leave, investigated, fired, and then criminally investigated and go to jail for that. So
Not in Idaho. It's pretty,
not in Idaho, apparently it's no big deal.
Their own rules.
Well, anytime you have an attorney or a police officer telling you that chain of custody is no big deal, that to me is a red flag that suggests you should look at every one of their cases to see whether or not they've been falsified in chain of custody. Because a lot of agencies put up with it. A lot of agencies will just ignore when a chain of custody has been falsified.
Yeah, and of course, the law enforcement there said there was no problem with the chain of custody. But what I think I've seen as an explanation given was, yes, there's the handwritten chain of custody, which may have been done after the fact or put on there, but there's also these barcodes. Was there an electronically kept chain of custody?
That's BS. So ignorant, I can't even respond.
Oh my God, it's so bad. It really, whoever is saying that has no idea what a chain of custody is and what the barcodes are for. The barcodes are for locating the item on the shelf. It has nothing to do with the chain of custody. The chain of custody is about who's handled the evidence, who's opened it and closed it, who's received it, who's transported it, so that you can determine whether or not the evidence has been tampered with or altered inappropriately, and therefore who's responsible. If you go through and have one person just create one for everybody, that's not everybody. It's like the same as signing an affidavit. It's a sworn document saying, I am receiving this. I opened it, I examined it, and there's going to be a report, and then I'm giving it back. And then somebody else comes and checks it out. You know, it's a bit. So the idea of the barcode thing, that's somebody anybody who's talking about the barcodes as being a chain of custody, they are a functional illiterate when it comes to forensic science and evidence custody of evidence. Functional illiterate.
That's even some attorneys. I was watching a podcast, I think last night, and they're I think they were PI attorneys, but one was actually a DA for a long time, and now he's a criminal defense. And he was completely trying to downplay the chain of custody and how it really wasn't that big deal. And even if it was, there was a broken chain of custody, it very likely would not have even impacted the outcome. But Sam and I were
not
talking
with him as an attorney, it wouldn't have.
for sure. And what if it would have?
So everybody should take note of who that guy was and never hire him for anything.
Terrible. I had to unsubscribe. Terrible.
There's a lot of ignorance on this issue, but any basic textbook on forensic science explains this very clearly. And what you want to do is have a forensic scientist explain it slowly, like they're talking to a fifth grader when they explain this to attorneys, prosecution or defense, or police officers, because this kind of stuff puts officers in jail when they fabricate what's called falsification of, what do we call it? We call it tampering with evidence, falsification of public documents, false reporting, and forgery.
Can you think of any legitimate circumstance where the chain of custody, as it appeared in this, written by one person, the same handwriting, would be legitimate, or would be there would be a good explanation?
You can't vouch for somebody else. Let's do it this way. Let's say it this way. We're going to do a drug test of me, and we're going to take those drug tests and put it into a bag, and then I'm going to hand it to, I'll hand it to one of you, and you'll receive it. Then you'll hand it to somebody else, and you'll receive it. And you'll hand it to somebody else, and they'll receive it. And then it'll be at the lab and be tested. Okay? But then we forgot to do it. So let's just have me go and do it all, do the whole chain of custody and sign your names on everything. And then we're going to go into court and say this is a legitimate chain of custody for all the people that examined it, and it vouches for everyone. Is that legitimate? Would you trust that?
No.
Exactly.
You're recreating. You're trying to recreate history.
Well, remember, there was I actually, in response to sort of Ann Taylor's bizarre claims, I posted a couple of articles related to this very issue where law enforcement officers had been fired for falsifying chain of custody. But there was there's a bigger one. There was I can't remember if it was Austin, Texas, or Dallas, Fort Worth, but one of the Texas Department of Public Safety crime labs, they had a huge DNA scandal, a series of them between 2000 and 2008 that got their DNA lab shut down. And one of the things they did was they brought in a new admin, and her job was to go through and make sure all the evidence lined up and was secure and safe and where it was supposed to be, right? The barcodes. Can we find it? Can we find it in the evidence custody, the evidence locker? Well, she didn't have chain of custody for a bunch of the items of DNA. So she just went around and fabricated them and asked people about them. She got fired for that. She got fired when that came out. All right? Because it is an illegitimate, unethical, incompetent, and fraudulent scientific process. You're trying to bolster the credibility and reliability of a piece of evidence by fabricating all the names and signing it yourself. And when you do that, put your job at risk.
Would the prosecution have been able to rehabilitate that by bringing in all the people whose names allegedly appeared on that? To say,
that's the argument, right? That I think is their posture. That we're just bringing people and have them testify about, that they actually did do it. That would work potentially, except one, I think the defense would have a huge problem with that because you really can't know whether or not these people are telling the truth well after the fact. But two, not every examination that was known to be done on that sheath was a part of the chain of custody. It was missing. It was missing some of the examinations.
Wow.
Yeah. In Chris's book, he indicates that there was a period of time it was missing too, which is even more concerning.
Yeah.
So even if the sheath was not excluded by Judge Hippler, which, who knows what he was going to do based on what he'd done previously. But there still would have been a huge reasonable doubt there for the jury on whether the sheath had been tampered with or could have been tampered with.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Ron, I think that's a good point because I know that everyone brings up the chain of custody and some people are saying it's not an issue, but when you're looking at the admissibility of potential evidence at trial, it certainly is an issue. What a judge would do with it may be a different thing, whether you'd agree with that or not, but it's still a very important issue because if it is excluded, then you can't even talk about that at all. It's out.
Or the little piece of DNA in the clasp. Here's the point. The people who are saying that are people who've already decided what they want to be true or what not to be true. But let's ask ourselves a basic question. It's like saying physical evidence isn't important or necessary. If that's true, then why do we have crime labs? Why do we bother to train people to collect evidence? Why do we bother to train people to test evidence? Why do we have a whole realm of the criminal justice system dedicated to forensic science and the interpretation of forensic evidence? Why is that important? And more importantly, why is the chain of custody right on the outside of the bag? Why is it right there for everyone to see? And why are we bothering to do the signatures? Why does that matter? Because it's super important for reliability and for admissibility. It's super important. And pretending it's not when you do that, it kind of shows your cards a little bit. Shows your cards. Shows who you really are as a criminal justice professional, or even as a commentator, that you've already decided and you don't want to hear it.
And this chain of custody issue with the sheath, this was something that you were bringing to Ann Taylor's attention right about the time the plea came down, right?
Yeah. Well, it was brought to my attention, and then it was asked to me as a question, and I answered the question, and then I was given the assignment of going and looking at all the change of custody for all other important.
And what point was that, though, when it was brought to your attention, Dr. Turvey? At what point, roughly, was that at?
Well, I don't know when everybody else knew, but it was a question that arose at some point. I couldn't tell you when, but it was brought to my attention about a week prior. And then I was given the task of running down change of custody on other items. And again,
so
that's not a secret.
I'm assuming you shared your conclusions based on your research. I'm assuming you shared those with Ms. Taylor.
For sure.
And you didn't even really have a chance to finish those tasks by the time he pled guilty, right?
Well, I can't answer that.
Okay.
I completed a lot. Let's put it this way: I completed a lot of tasks.
Okay. What were there other items of evidence that there were chain of custody issues that you did find?
I think that's a question that needs to be answered later. I can only discuss what's publicly disclosed.
Okay.
But I think that's a reasonable question that we should be asking. Everyone should be asking that question.
All right, I already got you penciled in for part 2, Dr. Turvey. That's awesome.
A year from now, after the IAC hearing, right?
There's got to be an IAC hearing, right?
There has to be.
No, there doesn't have to be at all. As long as Ann Taylor is the attorney and representing Brian Koberger, there's not any chance of that.
Justice requires it, I think.
Well, I would agree. I will just say this: science and justice both require a level of transparency that we're not experiencing in this case.
Can I ask this?
You can ask whatever you want.
Was any DNA found on that knife sheath ever directly tied to Brian Koberger?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, then why are we seeing that all over the place, that people are saying that Brian Koberger's DNA was found on the sheath?
It is right now. You guys are smart people. I like you guys. You're smart. So how many things do you see daily being discussed about this case that have no basis in reality?
Tons.
Yeah.
So much bullshit.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
So I know in the book, actually initially, the first crime lab that the sheath was sent to, they returned it saying there's no chain of custody, right?
In Texas, no, that was you're confusing two different events. Right?
Yeah.
One is the Idaho State Police Crime Lab. They are the ones who originally said, "Hey, we got the sheath now. I need a chain of custody form for this because there's not one on it." So they asked for one, and a few days later, Moscow police sent them one that they had fabricated. All right. Then there's the other issue of the testing of the DNA on the sheath, which is on the clasp, which was done at the lab in Texas, I think. The initial testing. So these are two separate issues.
And
The
what
lab in
was,
Texas, Othram.
Sorry, what?
Was that Othram Labs? The lab in
believe-
Texas?
I can't recall independently. The DNA was not my part, was not my area of expertise. The DNA interpretation is not my area of expertise. What I know is that at the Frank's hearing, pretty much everyone agreed that that the DNA that they found was an investigative lead and not sufficient to make an identification.
That's so. Yeah, I know that in the book, in Whitcomb's book, Chris's book, he indicated that the FBI essentially gave Brian Covert's name to local law enforcement as a tip, so that it's as strong as they can get. Do you have any information about that, or did he get that from others?
That's something you'd have to ask the FBI about. I don't. I mean, I think that answers the question. Everybody who testified at the Frank's hearing did not perceive this as a nail in the coffin. They perceived it as an investigative lead that should be followed up on. But then, cameras start rolling and people get in front of the camera and a microphone gets stuck in their face and they don't want to look like a slapped ass. So they start saying stuff. I'm more than happy to look like a slapped ass, by the way.
Well, I can tell you, Dr. Turvey, this case, it needed you. It needed Chris. It needed you to speak out. I can tell you as 3 attorneys sitting here, it is wild to me how few professionals have actually spoken out about how badly this case has been screwed up.
I've thought about that a lot. I'm glad you brought that up because I've thought about it a lot. There's nothing remarkable about what I'm doing in this case, given my 30 years of experience with other cases. I'm just doing it the same way I do all my cases, following the law, making sure that Brady material is disclosed, making sure that testing occurs that should occur, giving good advice to make sure that everybody's rights are protected. My real question is, why are so many other people frightened and not speaking up? And the reason why, in my opinion, is that they're compromised by money, or 2, they get a little close to something that they've never been close to before, a little power, a little celebrity, a little something, and they get excited and they just run amok. They start doing things that are against their nature. And I'm used to being somebody who is not popular. I'm not interested in being popular. I'm not interested in making friends, and I'm preserving my professional integrity for my other cases. That's what I do. When I'm thinking about I have more than once dumped myself off a case because an attorney was engaging in inappropriate, unethical behavior. And I said, I'm out, and I'm not doing this, and you go do your own thing on your own. That doesn't mean I need to speak up about it because it's maybe just unethical behavior that I don't like maybe they're using cocaine, or maybe they're cheating on their spouse, and I find that out, and I don't want anything to do with them. They're a hand grenade with a pin pulled, and I don't want to be around when it goes off. Okay. But I think there's a lot of people who don't know how to behave anymore. I think we're missing people that know how to behave in the criminal justice system. I think everyone who's just trying to get their glory. And I want to ask this directly so everybody can know. How much am I being paid for this interview?
0.
I'm not paying you.
That's right. Nothing. Did I ask for anything in exchange for this interview?
No.
Absolutely nothing.
No, nor would I. I already been paid for my time and my work on this case. I don't need money. Is the least of my interest because I'm protecting my reputation for future cases. Right. I have other cases I'm working in. My reputation has to be protected for those, not just this one. All right.
And one of the things that grabbed our attention to you is when we were going through the reports. This is even before we had ever even talked for the first time for our pre-call, over a month ago.
Okay, yeah.
Your report, it provided conclusions and your expert opinion, which is what so many of the prosecution's experts did not do. They couldn't tie things together. They didn't even, most of them didn't even give an expert opinion, which is the purpose of an expert. But, I would say the 3 of us did a pretty good job on your report when we were going through all of the issues with not even knowing everything we know today.
Right.
But you were very, very methodical and scientific, and your analysis was always spot on. And
right. I didn't give you that report. Let's do a little timeline here.
No,
I did not
you did
provide you
not.
my report. I didn't have to because
I'm talking about the sorry, it's the one that was released. It is
that's right.
Sutton.
Sutton's response to my report,
rebuttal,
where she
yes.
basically agrees with everything
Yeah.
and says everything I'm saying is possible and comes to no real conclusions of her own other than he must have been naked running through the house committing the crime. That's how he didn't have transfer material on him. It was
That might be
absurd.
one of the stupidest things I've ever heard.
It's her trying to make her client happy. This is the problem if you only work for one side or if you're trying to get work with another side. You twist yourself into a pretzel trying to make people happy. I never worry about making people happy. I know they're going to be mad with me when I'm done, so I don't care. But the point is, my report and the findings of my report were released in that disclosure and then published by Fox News back in January or February 2025. Then in March 2025, no. When was it? Was it this year? People Magazine, I think this year, got a copy of my report in Discovery. Or at least they said they did. And then they produced a whole article about it. What's interesting is they didn't contact me to ask me for comment. So that was interesting too.
That is interesting.
Yeah, but so my findings are out there. They're already out there. They're publicly available. And I'm one of the only experts whose findings from the defense are available. But I can tell you this, I wasn't standing on the corner by myself.
What were your biggest problems with Dr. Sutton's report and at least the few conclusions that she had in it?
Well, she didn't really have any real concrete conclusions. It was all maybe this, possibly that. And then, of course, she was trying to explain away the absence of evidence, right? Constantly trying to explain away the absence of evidence. That's not the role of a forensic scientist. They're not there to be an advocate. They're not there to help support the theory of their client. They're there to explain whether the theory the client has comports with the posture of the physical evidence as it exists. Okay? So she sort of took on the role of advocate, and that's my biggest problem. And she knows better. She knows better.
And I know that one of your conclusions, at least as it came out in Dr. Sutton's report and elsewhere, was that this crime was committed by at least two people, or
Yep.
certainly not committed by one person.
Certainly.
Why do you come to that conclusion?
Well, this is not, again, this is all public. This is not me disclosing anything that wasn't already there. One, you have the amount of time that this would have taken, the amount of cleanup that was involved, and then also the involvement of the lower floors and evidence being moved around that has blood on it on the first floor and the second floor, as well as multiple weapons being used, at least two knives and at least one blunt force object, that none of which were recovered or found. And then multiple methods of killing, even on one victim, where you have blunt force trauma, strangulation, and then multiple knife wounds. So, and contemporaneous with the other victim being killed right next to her. And the ability to control people like that is very difficult. So those things led to the conclusion that at least two people were involved. You don't see that where just one person. There was one, I'll tell you, there's one case that was really interesting that I worked on. It was two women who were married and they got into a domestic dispute and they got in a fight in the kitchen. You know, the most dangerous rooms in your house are going to be your kitchen or your bedroom, because that's where you have interactions with your partner. And they got into this big fight, and it started out with one getting a knife and stabbing them. Then the knife broke because of this shitty piece of shit, cheap knife. And then they used a screwdriver and that broke. And then they had a jar of pickles that shattered on the floor, and they took a shard from that and they were stabbing it with it. But it was all in the same location and all found at the scene and all tied to the one person. All right. In this case, whoever did this removed all the murder weapons from the home. They removed all the bloody clothing that they wore at the scene from the home. And they left in a vehicle that is yet to be identified.
Kind of interesting how
over his car down to the metal and tested it with everything they had. They couldn't find any evidence of transfer evidence from the crime scene into that vehicle. So it was eliminated.
Now, in your experience, is that something that would be normal for them not to find, stripping that vehicle down to the nails and not finding any connection back to the defendant?
Well, think of it this way. You commit the crime, you got blood on your hands, you got blood on your feet, you got blood on your clothes, hair, face. Unless you go take a shower, which there's evidence that could have happened, because the first floor bathroom was completely cleaned. Could have been, but that would have taken more time and required a lot of confidence on the part of the person. You know, somebody who was very confident they weren't going to be interrupted. If they then moved into the vehicle, that might be true. Might be. But you'd have to show that evidence of that cleanup. And you'd have to sort of, so I can see the possibility. But it makes more sense if the person spent that time in the house cleaning up, which there's evidence there was time spent cleaning up in that bathroom with these clothes and with the removal of items and objects from the first floor bathroom.
And Chris points out in his book that there was nothing remaining in that bathroom that would be normal to have, you know, toothbrush, towels, normal things in that bathroom. Does that point to any?
It's more than that. Yeah, it's more than that. So you go into that, every other bathroom has floor mats, toilet paper, garbage, dirty clothes, towels, you know, bath products. You go into that bathroom on the first floor, there's nothing. I mean, there's some shampoo and conditioner, I think, in the shower stall, but there's no garbage. There's no toilet paper. There's no floor mats. Everything's gone. Everything you expect to be is gone. And that's a bathroom that's being used by other people. But that's not the most important. That's important, but then you add that to the fact that there's a bracelet found on the floor in the bedroom to the right. You walk into that bedroom, you walk into that house on that with a stairway to the left and the bathroom in front, and there's a bedroom to the right. And in that bedroom, on the floor, police identified and photographed a bracelet that had blood on it. And they anticipated collecting it. And so they moved it to a location on the desk next to a computer keyboard and I think a power drink. Well, that item was left there, was photographed days later by another crime scene investigator still in that location, never collected, not on the evidence list.
How is that even
So
possible?
never tested then too.
Never collected, never tested, never even sourced. Well, how is that possible? I mean, the problem we have is we have a movie and TV idea of how crime scenes are processed. All right. Mm-hmm. If you watch the body cams in this video, it's very instructive on this case. And these are, again, they've all been released. And what it shows is people that are traumatized, people that are upset, people that are excited, making judgments and making statements that are unsupported. I think first officer at the scene said, I think it's a murder-suicide. Looks like he killed her and he died, you know, that kind of stuff. People say and do things. They decide what the narrative is, and then they start collecting evidence that supports and reinforces that narrative because that's what they're looking for. And once you do that, you're off the plot. All right? You're gone. You're done. You don't really have any idea what's going on. It happens all the time. I work cases where I'm looking at a group of people standing around talking to the police, and their feet are all covered with blood and blood spatter, and there's a murder weapon in the corner, and the officer never once collects their clothing or even notices the murder weapon because they're excited. Remember, these guys are not experienced homicide investigators. This is not what they do. Everybody there is brand new. They're new to the world of homicide, let alone mass homicide. How does it happen? Inexperience, lack of training, too much adrenaline.
Would it have been customary to leave the bracelet where it is and then it be collected without even moving it to the desk? I mean, that seems to be more logical.
Yeah. Somebody got excited and distracted. You would leave it there, take a photo in situ, then you put maybe a ruler down to give it a size, take a picture of that. Then you put an evidence placard down, give it a number, and log that in, take a picture of that. And then you take close, medium, and long-range shots of each item of evidence so that the purpose of doing crime scene investigation and documentation like this is so that you can take any piece of evidence that you found at the crime scene and put it right back in the crime scene where you found it. If you can't do that with every item of evidence that you've collected, then you have been negligent. Your job is to collect the evidence and document it in such a way that you can put it right back where you found it, to the inch. You know, it's not that hard. It just takes time.
Were there other items of evidence found in like the spare bedroom that weren't tested or appeared to have just been left?
There was a crock on the second floor bathroom that appeared to have bloody material on it that was documented but never collected. One shoe, one crock.
And I'm
That, by the way, was the bathroom with the washer and dryer in it.
Interesting. Now, assuming to your knowledge, Anne knew about these things as well, that they weren't the bracelet being lost.
Yes.
And I know it sounds remedial asking that, but this is what people always want to say. Well, she didn't know, or this wasn't known to the defense. And I'll
give her more credit than you're willing to. She knew better than me. most of the stuff that was problematic. That's one of the reasons why she had my respect throughout my examination. She had a encyclopedic knowledge of the case, back and forth. So any claims of ignorance at this late date are, she knew more than me, because she was also, I was giving her my findings, which again, all widely reported, but she was also getting findings from her other experts. And I wasn't getting it. By the way, I was not receiving that. I was not getting it because that was not my role. My role was not to evaluate the work of other defense experts.
Now, I know a lot of people want to comment that, oh, she was just saving that for trial. I don't believe that to be the case, but can you potentially elaborate if that is customary to not challenge the issues pre-trial and just quote unquote save it for trial?
Well, I'll respond in general without trying to get inside her head, because she obviously did not want to go to trial. That's not a secret either. She made the deal. Without getting in her head, I'll just say in general, absolutely. There are times when it is an attorney makes a tactical decision not to disclose something, but hope that it gets revealed on the stand. There are also times when you're barred from saying certain things and you kind of got to wait for the door to be open so that you can address issues. So I would say it another way. Since there was no trial in this case, we can't know what was in anybody's head about that strategy. What I know is these issues were all brought to the floor. They were all understood by all involved, and there was an agreement across everyone that there was no direct evidence implicating Koberger at the scene. That was understood, very clear. Not something that was hidden or misunderstood. And again, that's not a secret. That's something that she was saying to the world at any chance she got. So, and by that I mean the filings that she made, which were public and that sort of thing. The world was watching.
Let's move into the beer pong table that is known around the world, which also the White Claws, the box of White Claws that Chris brought up in his book that I think shocked all of us as well. Are those a couple issues that you could?
Well, the beer pong table is boring to me. I'm not interested in that. There's so many other bigger issues to talk about. The beer pong table has no relevance in my mind whatsoever. But I can say that the White Claw box had blood on it, and you can see it photographed in different places around the scene. So it's being moved. And there are a number of items of evidence that got moved around, whether by police or other people interacting with the scene, like the knife that got used by the first gentleman in the friend who entered the house to clear it with his knife while everybody else was hiding in the bedroom. That knife, just sort of moved around. That's interesting to me, but I want to say it this way, and I don't want to be condescending or mean, but I think people have focused on these things because that's what they had. And for me, it's interesting. I'm glad that Chris is talking about it in his book. I think it's interesting. A lot of people have been talking about it. But to me, it's like 25th, 26th, 27th thing on the list. Just way down there.
What are 1, 2, and 3 on your list?
The sheath, the hair, and the cleanup, and the lack of evidence tying Koberger to any of it. Lack of physical evidence. Is there any? But also, what's really important is the 911 call. The 911 call is full of false statements by the people on it about what's going on and what happened and what they're observing. So all those things together are way more important than whether or not there was something on the beer pong table or whether there was a crash or whatever. That's interesting, and it's part of the narrative. I get it, but it has no interest to me whatsoever.
So what is specifically interesting to you about the 911 call?
Wait. I was like, Sam, I want to get into that, but I just have one more question that we could finish here before we go into the 911 call. Do you believe the narrative is on par with what is being represented by the prosecution? And I think something that people don't entirely get in Chris's book is that I don't know that Chris entirely believes that the narrative as is what it was claimed. They're going off of what was presented by the prosecution and what was known to be true, or at least that was the presumption. Do you believe that time frame is actually the time frame of the murders, because we hear screams as early as I think it's like 1:40.
I mean, okay. I mean, it's just not that interesting, in my opinion. I mean, it's interesting to people who are trying to get through the granular detail. I get it. But for me, it's not that interesting. There's much bigger, much more important issues. So
You want to focus on that?
let me say something that's going to be offensive, and I don't mean to offend anyone. Unless you're, if you are offended, try not to take it.
We have thick skin.
Thank God. I don't believe anything. Belief is a word that means accepting without proof. I don't believe anything. I don't believe anything. I don't have any of that issue. All right. So, so when you ask me, do I believe this? Do I believe that? I don't believe anything. I require proof. I base my findings, my expert forensic findings, on facts and evidence. Right. I don't do belief, and I don't do guesswork. Use what the evidence supports and what the evidence doesn't support. And that's why I say that the beer pong table is, it's like a little stroke fantasy of a bunch of fangirls and fanboys out there who really just want to get into that granular detail that doesn't move the needle. All right. I know that sounds offensive, but that's the way it is.
It's not offensive at all.
Thank God.
It's very straight up. All right. So with respect to the 911 call, and I just want to say it was actually the 911 call. I think it was Outcast's original 911 call, or that he did. That was what got us into the case.
Oh, really?
Was the 911 call, the 8-hour delay. How is this even possible? And I remember playing it for Sam, and that was truly where we got involved in this case, because it just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense.
Well, what we're learning, of course, what we're learning is what all of us who were examining the case already knew at the time, but now is publicly disclosed, is that during the 911 call, there was the inference of the claim that they just kind of woke up to this. Well, no, they didn't. They were on their phones the entire time talking to people. I won't go into the detail of that, but they were all up talking to different people, right? So they weren't asleep. That's first thing. Second thing is they claimed that they saw one of their friends unconscious in their room. Well, each of the two rooms has two people in it with blood everywhere. And the idea that they could see the person non-responsive and not see the other dead person next to them and the blood everywhere is sort of nonsense. So let me just say a generic thing that may or may not be applied to this case. One of the only studies on staged crime scenes that have ever been done was done by me some years ago. And one of the key elements that you find is that people who stage crime scenes, they want someone else to find the body. They don't want to be the one who finds it. So they orchestrate events so that other people find it. Maybe that's relevant here, maybe not. Investigatively, I'd want to look at that. But I do know that the 911 call is full of things that don't make any sense. All right, like I just said. And that by itself should be a problem for anyone examining this case.
Is there anything else significant about the cleanup, or is there any other direct evidence that you see outside of what you mentioned that evidence is a cleanup?
Well, other than the cleanup? Not to make fun, but
like, for example, the commentary that somehow the diluted blood could be mixed with saliva. There's nothing that you saw that would support anything wild like that. Obviously, I feel kind of embarrassed as a heads up asking that question.
We laughed with Chris about that. The amount of saliva that would have had to been produced.
I don't even want to comment on it because it's such a bizarre. Everyone's focusing on this because that's what they've had for years, and they're focusing on this little bit, and they're ignoring the planted sheath. They're ignoring the untested hair. They're ignoring the timeline. They're ignoring the cleanup. I mean, come on, get back to reality.
It does seem interesting to me that whoever did it was able to take away all evidence of clothing, weapons, anything used in it, but forgot the sheath.
Well, the sheath wasn't forgotten. It was deliberately placed. So, because there's no way to get it. And it was deliberately placed after initially being found on the floor. That's not me saying that. That's the police report saying that and the photograph saying that. I'm not disclosing anything secret here. This is exactly what the narrative has shown and what the evidence has shown. It's just nobody wants it. The problem I'm seeing with this case over and over again is the people who want Koberger to be guilty, they're willing to overlook huge holes in the narrative. They're willing to overlook massive amounts of evidence that point in other directions. And the people that want them to be innocent are focusing on the granular detail that's not relevant because they don't have access to the actual evidence, or they maybe have access to it, but don't have the ability to assess it, examine it, and interpret it in the way that a forensic scientist does.
Do you view the cleanup as exculpatory evidence in favor of Kohberger? In other words, that the fact that the cleanup happened really leads to the inescapable conclusion that he couldn't have done this in the time he allegedly had.
Well, let's just clean that up a little bit and just say it this way, very simply. What happened at this crime scene took way more time than the prosecution has allotted for Brian Kohberger to be responsible. What do they got? Somewhere, depending on the narrative they give, it's somewhere between 7 and 15 minutes. This would have taken much longer to do that. More importantly, the proof that they had of this was they had an officer run up and down the stairs to try to, show that he could do all this really quickly without a cleanup. But even so, the problem with that is he knew the house, he knew the routes, he knew the rooms. This is not a home that existed based on the floor plan that was filed with the city or the county or wherever. You couldn't go to the city and the county and get a floor plan that matched what happened here because the owner had transformed the interior into a living quarters for these students, right? Putting at least 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on each floor. Okay. But the way it was laid out was so weird that if this was your first time in there, you're going to be lost. And if it's dark, you're going to be even more lost. You're going to be searching. But instead, this offender went right upstairs to the 3rd floor, attacked the girls and killed the girls up there, then encountered Zainab in the kitchen on the way out. And she ran down the hallway and they chased her down and killed her and killed Ethan as well. So
what evidence? I think in Chris's book, he mentioned that it appears there's evidence that Xana was first encountered at least by the killer or killers in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Is there evidence of that? Because a lot of people have tied, there was initially some an indication that Xana's blood was on the beer pong table, which turns out that was a mistake by Sutton. What other evidence was there of Xana initially being encountered in the kitchen area?
Ethan was drunk and asleep in the bedroom. Right? They'd all been out drinking that night. Okay, they were all intoxicated. So he's asleep in the bedroom. She orders her food. She receives her food, and she's eating it in the kitchen. Part of it can be found in the kitchen where she's eating, and she's on TikTok, going through TikTok and doing stuff. Then you find some of that food in her bedroom. All right. Those 2 things show she was started out in the kitchen eating and then wound up in the bedroom because that's where we know that's where she died. And by the way, I don't want to be glib about this. She put up a fight. She fought like I've never seen anybody fight. She fought like crazy. She fought like crazy. It's tragic.
And the fact can you really argue with a straight face that there was no cleanup, given the lack of any bloody footprints or anything other than some stray drops on the 2nd floor?
No, you can't. This crime resulted in massive amounts of blood, especially the 3rd floor where the 2 victims were killed there. There's no blood on the floor. Those victims never got out of bed. They were killed in their bed. All right. Ethan was killed very quickly while trying to defend himself on his back from a sharp force weapon. Xana was killed outside the bed, next to the bed, with blood getting everywhere all over the floor. There's no way the offenders in this case didn't get blood all over their feet and all over their clothes and then transfer that as they're walking out, especially given the fact that the lights are off and it's nighttime or early morning. Okay. So the fact that we didn't find any footwear patterns in the blood from that location indicates a cleanup of those items by default. Okay.
With respect to the one shoe print that they were able to find with the Amito Black right at the opening of Dylan's door.
Right.
What can you tell us, or what did you find interesting or important with that?
I didn't. There's no value to it that I can see, because we don't have other footwear patterns to compare it to or discuss, and I would leave that to to me, it's not. It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't tell us anything other than if somebody had been that close to her and chose not to kill her, that didn't make any sense. But her whole narrative, the problem is I know more that I'm not telling, because it was a whole narrative of things that she said that don't line up. And so that's the problem. The problem is her statement in general defies credibility if you go point by point through it. And I think that's something that we got deprived of when a trial didn't occur. Because remember, you have the 911 call sort of sets the stage, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A false narrative about being asleep, a false narrative about, not seeing the other dead bodies in the house, a false narrative about a friend who's unconscious as opposed to dead and covered with blood. All that false narrative. I think if you add in this notion that you saw somebody with bushy eyebrows, that didn't come up until she was interviewed, I think, the third time. So these details sort of kind of find their way into the case, and there's no basis for them, and they've never been challenged. So
you mentioned something about the lighting and about the dark. I think there's been some discussion about were there lights on, how dark was it, how light was it. Did you find any evidence indicating what lights may have been on or not?
The problem is we only have some unreliable witness statements from outside, and then from inside, you can't trust anything that anybody's saying, because they've all been giving false statements. They've all given statements that have shown, not the entire statement's not false, obviously, but they've all given statements that contain false elements. So the reliability of the people inside the house is questionable. The reliability of people outside the house is questionable. That's what I would say.
One of the things that we noticed very early on is how the roommates or the surviving roommates were almost automatically just deemed survivors. And a lot of the people, or the people that should have been questioned, I think they cleared a ridiculously high amount of people in a very short period of time. But these people weren't separated.
No.
I mean, some of them even stayed at the same hotel the night of, when we can see them in the lobby of the Moscow PD. They're all hovered together. I mean, even when we do our trials, if we have witnesses that are going to testify to anything, they have to be outside of the courtroom from the second that the judge takes the bench. It is just, it's hard to process how.
Let's back up. Let's back up and remind ourselves that the people in the house were together talking for 8 hours. Up, right? That's the first thing. And we don't know all the people that were in the house, just the two that admit they were in the house. Then, when the police arrived, everybody got out of the house, and everybody stayed together, and they clumped together, and they spent hours together talking outside the house while police responded internally. So, from the get-go, there's a lack of proper procedure being followed with respect to separating witnesses and getting good statements from them. Everybody's just too busy reacting because, again, these people are all very inexperienced with this kind of crime. So the context is one of extreme contamination of witness statements. Mm-hmm. And then subsequent to that, every interview after that, things just kind of change and details get added and, inconsistencies become clear. And again, that would have been presented at trial, I imagine.
Was there any other point of significance? You mentioned the knife that was picked up. I don't know if it was Hunter who picked up the knife when the police first got there. Is there anything else of significance? Could that have been a potential weapon that was used on the victims, or just significant in how it was handled?
It was just how it was handled. I mean, they were too busy responding emotionally to the crime scene as opposed to professionally. So, I mean, it was there. We see it. It moves. It sort of disappears and moves around. But the fact that you have somebody in there walking around the crime scene with a knife, who's not involved in the crime, obviously, that's a problem.
Right.
And that contaminates the scene. And law enforcement's job in those circumstances is to make sure that contamination is mitigated as much as possible. And that really didn't happen.
I got a question about Dylan, who supposedly came face to face with at least one of the killers. she apparently was treated quite differently than Xana, who apparently came upon the killers at some point. She was chased and killed herself, but Dylan was not. Based on your experience, I know you've got some experience with criminal profiling as well. What does that suggest to you?
I don't accept that version of events is accurate. So I don't make anything of it because I don't accept that she's a reliable witness because of so many things that have been said that are just not borne out by the evidence.
Do you believe Bethany is a reliable witness?
None of them are. None of them are reliable. They've all said things that are not true and patently false, especially on the 911 call and especially in the other interviews they've given. So
it's not just a matter of maybe they were drunk or maybe they were not comprehending things. It's a little more than that. The reliability is not just in not giving coherent information, it's giving false information, right?
Well, information that is demonstrably false. I can't, and I'm not saying they're lying or intentionally deceiving. I'm just saying here's how you got to perceive me. Because what I think people want to do is when they don't have physical evidence, they come up with theories and then they try to find a witness that backs them up. All right? That's the problem. It's the problem with the way people think about crime. Everybody lies, and everybody lies for different reasons, right? Not all of them have to do with guilt. Some with embarrassment, some with lack of memory, some with, other reasons. My job is to look at the physical evidence and compare that to statements and determine which statements are supported by the physical evidence and which statements are refuted by the physical evidence. And when I find that you have statements that are refuted repeatedly by physical evidence from a particular witness, that's how we know that witness is not reliable for whatever reason.
What statements do you recall from Dylan that were refuted by the physical evidence? I think you've mentioned a couple of them.
But here's what I don't want to do. This is a rabbit hole that I know you guys want to dive down into and jerk off over, but I'm not doing that. I don't do that. I mean, to me, it's a distraction from the main features of this case, designed to prolong and go into rabbit holes that don't bear fruit. All right. All you need to know is they're not reliable. They've said things, and we've already discussed them. We discussed the 911 call. We've discussed all that good stuff and the other interviews. We don't need to get into that granular detail. That's the problem. You want to get into the granular detail and really go over it like statements have meaning. Let me say something to you very bluntly. Physical evidence is king. It is the most objective and reliable documentation of the crime scene. That's why we have to bother to document and collect and test it. And it makes people angry when you ask for testing when it goes against the things that they don't like, or the things that they do like with the narrative they've chosen, whether it's a defense attorney, a prosecutor, a judge, or a podcaster. And I don't do that.
I can say, Dr. Turvey, that I appreciate your candor because it's allowing us to really understand what is factually significant and what isn't. And that's an important distinction for us to make.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier, you were talking about the fact that there's evidence of multiple weapons in a blunt object. So can we talk about that a little bit? What factual evidence really, what direct evidence at the scene supports that? Because we don't have any of those murder weapons.
The autopsy reports. Okay. The state's own autopsy reports come to these conclusions. This isn't me. I didn't do the examination. The autopsy reports make it very clear. Multiple methods of killing, multiple weapons. The state's own autopsy reports. The state's own medical examiner would have been a key witness for the defense.
And multiple stabbing weapons.
That's right. One that's one-sided and one that's dagger, which has got two sides.
Did anybody test or try to determine whether a K-bar knife was one of the weapons?
Not that I'm aware of.
I mean, we see a lot about the sheath. You can do testing. You can determine that, can't you?
No, you can't. That's TV movie bullshit. You can't. Okay. You can determine depth of the injury. You can determine width of the injury, but you You can just eliminate knives, but you can't usually confirm what knife was used or not. Well, I can tell you this much. Let me say it a different way that you're not going to like. There's no evidence that a K-bar knife was used in the commission of these crimes, other than the sheath, which was directly deposited. But that does not mean a K-bar knife was used to inflict those wounds. And I, by the way, pretty sure I'm the only person in this case who's actually worked a case involving a K-bar murder, a murder with a K-bar knife. It was an ex-Marine in what was it, Vista, California, who I worked on this case where he killed 3 people, all of them who were customers of his daughter who lived in the same apartment complex. She was working in the temporary companionship business. And she had 1 guy she was sleeping with and 2 guys in the waiting room. And the father came over and killed them all. And he did it in a way that was just incredible. He came in and he did the classic kill move where he raises the arm up and he cuts it under here and he stabs him in the liver and the vital organ. It was the execution was systematic and deliberate, and across all 3 cases was the same. And it was with a K-bar. And he took the K-bar and he dumped it in the ocean. They went.
Are there specific characteristics then that a K-bar knife would leave that you did not see here? Or are we back in the TV realm?
This is a TV thing. This is something you guys have been watching on CSI your whole life, and you think you can drop clay or some liquid material that solidifies and you get the knife that comes. That's not a real thing. TV is lying to you. Just remember that all the time to get you to believe things that aren't true so that you will, so that they can fill gaps in their bad writing.
That's just another representational of how juvenile this investigation was. They said it was a K-bar immediately based on the fact that they found the sheath. Like, you couldn't have it, and the way it was just spread with people like Brian Enton and just put in front of the news and put in front of people every single day to the point that they believe it. And that was, again, one of the first things we're like, they've never even claimed to have believed they found the weapon. And it's very clear there was multiple weapons, but based on the signature. Let me
put it another way. The judge in this case put a gag order in place to prevent the prosecution from doing what it did, which is to go to the press directly or indirectly and start trying the case in the press, because they knew they didn't have it. This case was tried in the press, and to his credit, the judge tried very hard to prevent that from happening. And that's on all of us to make sure that we don't, to go back to the leak, or actually to come full circle now to the leak that's being investigated. We have a responsibility to keep that information confidential prior to trial, prior to public disclosure, right? To make sure that people don't get tried in the press, all right? So somebody wanted to make sure that this case was tried in the press long before a trial occurred, so that to tamper with the jury, to poison it.
Did the leak, and I think we're talking about the Dateline leak, did that harm the defense?
Oh, I don't see how it couldn't. It harmed the ability of Brian Koberger to get a fair trial, because the leak was done in such a way to provide material that was harmful to Brian Koberger. All right. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, when the investigation took place, I was like, of course I did. Why wasn't the leak? And I signed the affidavit and was happy to do that. Would have been happy to testify about it. But because that's the onus, that's the responsibility, is not to be a leak, not to provide confidential information, especially when a judge gives an order, you got to follow it. But there's no way that this did not impact a potential trial or his ability to get a fair trial. And that would be the intent. But that does not mean that the source of the leak was the prosecution.
Are we going to leave it there?
It's public knowledge. It's public knowledge. We've all read it online. We've pretty much seen it everywhere. It's public knowledge that Ann Taylor is being investigated as a potential leaker.
Well, her office in general, but then her in specific, I imagine. But let's put it another way. There are 2 investigations. I think people are conflating these. It's really weird how, to me, just how uninformed people are and how confident they are stating things that are just not true, that they don't understand, and blasting them to the world. Let's make this clear and make it easy for your listeners to understand. First, after the Dateline leak, There was an administrative investigation by the court at the direction of the judge, all right, to find out who that leak was. An administrative investigation. Okay, that's investigation number one. That investigation was completed, a report was filed, and that file was sealed. Okay, you can see it in the documents. It's a sealed file. It's public. It's public that it's there and sealed. Then, and I thought that was it. I thought it was all done. Then in January, I got contacted by the Ada County Sheriff's Department, a guy who said, I'm a detective and I have, I'm in charge of, me and two other officers are in charge of conducting a criminal investigation into the NBC data leak. So this is a second separate criminal investigation. The first one was administrative. It had a result and it's sealed. Now they're doing a separate criminal investigation. And I don't know when they started that, but they contacted me in January. Then, most interestingly, and I didn't respond, by the way, I didn't respond to that. And I have no intention of responding to it. I wouldn't talk to the police without a subpoena and a defense attorney with me, just because I don't trust the process in Idaho at this moment.
I was just gonna say, especially not in Idaho.
No, well, in this context, I don't trust them because I don't know what their goal or their intentions are. All right. So Ann Taylor contacts me about 6 weeks later, giving me permission to talk to the police. This is a red flag for me, like a burning, bright, screaming red flag, because the first thing I did was contact my clients and say, hey, I've been asked by my attorney client in this case, my former attorney client in this case, to speak freely with the police about the leak. They're going to ask me questions about everything that will all that'll do is just violate the privilege top to bottom. And she goes, every single attorney, I talked to 3 of them. They're all top-notch attorneys. They said, do not talk to the police. You're going to be out hanging out there to dry while Ann Taylor has invited you to violate the privilege that she has with Brian Koberger, which I would not do. So I didn't respond to her either, but she gave me permission to do it. What should have happened from any ethical defense attorney is that she should have put herself between the police and any of her experts being spoken to and said, you may talk to me and ask me questions, but you will not talk to my experts. That's what she should have done. Instead, she said, hey, go ahead and talk to him. Say whatever you want. Are you out of your mind? You think I'm going to do that? No way. Then they contacted me again about 4 weeks ago, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago, saying, hey, we're still interested in doing an interview. It was just really casual, like I'm their buddy. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So that investigation is still ongoing. That criminal investigation is ongoing. But understand this, they concluded their administrative investigation and filed a report. That signifies to me, and should signify to anybody with a brain, that they know who the leak is. And they're not going after their own people. They're going after somebody in Ann Taylor's office.
That would be my guess, because they got the administration, they got the person they believe, and now they're doing a subsequent follow-up independent investigation to make sure that they're going to get the same finding, is what I would presume.
No, that's not it at all. It's exactly the opposite. Nope. You got to understand. Okay. Does everybody here know what the Garrity rule is? No. So
we're about to.
You either know what the Garrity rule is or you don't. It's not a little bit. You can't.
We're about to know. You're going to let us know.
You've heard of it. Okay. All right. Well, the Garrity rule says that you can't use the result of an administrative investigation in a criminal investigation. So if you want to conduct a criminal investigation into an administrative finding, you have to conduct law enforcement agency has to conduct their own separate investigation, conduct their own interviews, collect their own evidence, and do their own stuff. That's the Garrity rule. All right. So this comports with the Garrity rule, which is one is administrative, and they come to a finding, and then one is criminal, and it's church and state. They can't meet oil and water. Otherwise, there is a component. Garrity argues there's a component of coercion on the part of the state to investigate its own people and blah, blah, blah. I've written about it quite a bit. It's actually pretty interesting, but most people don't really understand that. In fact, not only that, but most people in law enforcement don't understand. I've worked cases where I've not worked. I am aware of cases where, like, let's say in my hometown of Sitka, there was a jail officer named Stephen Case, and he was found to have beaten the crap out of a drunk female while she was handcuffed to a wall in the prison lockup. So they interviewed him. They took the video recordings of the jail and they fired him. And then the state troopers came in and criminally prosecuting them using the evidence from the administrative file. Well, he filed a lawsuit saying that this was a violation of Garrity. He won. He won about $400,000, or no, either $200,000 or $400,000. I can't remember. But then he started a Subway in town. He got a Subway franchise out of it. All right. Not because he was innocent, but because they had investigated it wrong and screwed it up. So he could never actually be criminally held liable because they used the administrative evidence against him for the criminal part. Okay. And this is a context that's repeated all over the country. If the people that are involved are ignorant of the Garrity rule. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think that's what I was saying. I think we just said it wrong. 2 separate investigations to get to ultimately the same conclusion, but they cannot rely on what the other
That's right.
investigation used. Yeah.
That's right. That's it.
Right.
Exactly right. Well, I got to be honest. I know it sounds like I'm sure the people who don't know me think I'm an asshole for being this way, but
I don't know. You're pretty popular in the comments here.
well, we'll see. We'll see if that lasts. But the point is, the job is about language. The job is about specifics. The job is about being clear, and the job is about using the right words because these words have consequence. They have meaning. They have weight. All right. So it's very much important that we use the right language because guess what's going to happen? One of the funnest things one of the most interesting things I think that's going to happen as a result of this podcast is that there are going to be people who will repeat from this podcast things incorrectly, inaccurately, and craft it into their own narrative. And they'll misquote Ron, Sam, Kristen, me. They'll misquote whoever they need to just because they're getting it wrong. Because in their mind, they hear one thing and then they convert it into something else that fits their narrative. And then, it winds up being nothing close to the truth.
It's the same people that think the chain of custody is not that big of a deal. So I just chalk it up as to keep
maybe. But the job is to be careful with language, to be careful with how we represent the facts, the evidence, and the resulting narrative. We have to be careful. Okay, we can't just be blithe. That's why I see my kids always used to say, "Oh my God, it's time for another lecture. He's going to explain." It's because my youngest daughter, she thinks like a lawyer, and I'll tell her, "You can't do that." Okay, great. Then she'll go do something else that's completely against what I meant, and she goes, "Well, you didn't say I couldn't." She's like reverse engineering.
There you go.
Exactly. So you got to be careful with your language, or there are going to be consequences. So if I seem like, in the words of Dr. Deutsch from, he's a forensic psychiatrist from, UCLA, San Diego. David Deutsch said, he goes, if I seem like I'm being difficult, it's because I mean to.
Right.
Well, we appreciate it.
Well, but I'll give it one of my favorite quotes before we wrap up. My favorite quote is from a client of mine. We were working on a death penalty case in California. His name was Barnes. He's a former prosecutor turned defense attorney, really great guy. And he goes, you know what, Turvey, I like you. And I said, why? He goes, you like me. I'm not unfriendly. I just don't like playing dumb. So,
Dr. Turvey, what do you think with respect to, I'm not sure if it was something that you would speak about, but all of the phone data information that has been released as of late. Is it something that's super important? Is it kind of like the beer pong table? I think most of us are sitting there when Ethan got the text from Erica that he was being cheated on. The lack of no response, at least from what we can tell, even inquiring about it, that is concerning.
Well, let's put it this way. First, all the things I said before that are my top 3, 4, 5 things, those are still the most important 3, 4, 5 things. However, I haven't examined that data dump, and I'm not going to. That's not my role. I'm more interested to see what you guys think. I'm more interested to see what the public thinks about it, because the reality is it has not been examined by anyone. I'm more concerned about the lateness of the data dump. I'm more concerned about how we got gigabytes of data to examine on the eve of trial, a month before trial. That concerns me. Very concerning. Because there were years for that disclosure to occur. And either that would have required, in my opinion, not my opinion, my experience, normally that would require a case to be pushed back. And nobody seemed to want that. They wanted to get there and get into court and do it, or make a deal. So, and I'm not disclosing anything secret there. It's just my experience is the result of that sort of lateness is a sort of a punishment by the court, or a acknowledgement that more time is needed to examine. You can't have people on the stand testifying about evidence that just got disclosed and hasn't been examined. That's the more
Is it
important.
It is very concerning. It's so late.
Is it even possible that Brian could have had a reasonable knowledge of what was in that data dump by the time he pled?
No, he wouldn't know. I mean, that begs, that assumes that he was in a state of mind that he could participate with his defense and be going over. I don't know how he was getting information. I don't know how he was receiving it. I don't know how he was reviewing it. I had no contact with him. I don't know. But I can tell you this, in order for him to be, for any defendant to participate in their defense, they need access to all the evidence and information, and they need time to review it, just like the rest of us.
And that there just wasn't time for that.
It had just been dumped on us, and then we made the plea. Or I didn't,
What?
but I didn't make the plea.
To your knowledge, was Kaylee's phone ever actually gotten into? Were they actually able to recover the data from Kaylee's phone?
I don't want to comment on that.
Part 2 coming soon.
I want to comment. I like commenting on things that are public and that I have examined. So
Are there
That's a hot topic on.
are there any other things that are public and that you've examined that we haven't brought up that are significant?
not that are significant. There's a lot of rabbit holes in this case. A lot of rabbit holes. Okay?
What do you think?
What about the spare bedroom? Can we talk about the spare bedroom?
In what way?
What that's where I think, isn't that where Dylan's green jacket was found?
Yeah.
And that there was actual evidence that blood was on that jacket.
Yeah. Should have been examined more carefully. Should have been, just like every other piece of evidence in this case. It goes back to the general question for me is, why was everyone so unenthusiastic about testing evidence in this case? I'm very unenthusiastic in my opinion. It seems like a decision was made early on, and then disclosures to the defense came as a result of those sort of the narrative decisions that were made. But then they were compelled by the defense to disclose stuff, and so they were slow rolling the information out. This is a very common tactic, to slow roll disclosures and prevent what we call timely disclosures, and then prevent examination prior to trial. So you wind up on the stand with evidence that's been given, maybe the couple weeks before that you haven't had time to look at. It's a concept we call forced negligence. All right, forced negligence.
What do you think is the most persuasive exculpatory evidence?
The hair in Ethan's hand. So goddamn obvious.
So crazy. So
Goddamn obvious. It's so obvious. The hair in his hands. I want to know whose it is, and I want to know how it got there. Once we know whose it is, we'll know exactly how it got there. Sure.
What about the idea that there was testing on the sheath and the DNA went to someone else, another man's DNA? I think people call it Four Brothers. It was from Othram.
Yeah. That's it. Let's put this into perspective. If the Innocence Project got this case and did that test and came up with that result, it would be an exoneration. To be popping corks, right?
Mm-hmm.
That gives you all the information you need to know. I want to tell you something else, though. This is something very important, not related to this case, but related to it. I have worked probably 20 cases in my career where the DNA evidence does not match the person that was convicted. I'll give you an example. There was a case of an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old girl I worked in Oklahoma City, or not Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma for the OSBI about 15, 16 years ago. And both of them had semen in their vaginas that belonged to somebody else. And they eventually arrested and convicted somebody else without ever explaining how that semen got in their vaginas. They were found shot to death on the side of the road and redressed after being shot. All right? They didn't want to know. They did not want to know. This is not uncommon. I worked in another case, Kentucky versus Southworth, where a guy was convicted of murdering his wife at the time. She was leaving him, and her body was found under a mattress in their behind a wall outside their backyard, and she had a sperm in her vagina that didn't belong to him, and nobody ever identified it. Never was identified. Convicted him. He got out on an Alford plea, but I am very troubled by how DNA is misunderstood and misused by the court, by the prosecution, by the defense, and by the courts very often. And they will ignore it when it's convenient, and they will embrace it when it's just as convenient. So,
Well, and there was other DNA found too. We talk about it. Just why not err on the side of caution? There's such a long list of items that were tested.
well, especially when you're going to kill the person, right?
Mhm.
When you're going to kill him, don't you want to be sure? Don't you want to be certain? Apparently not. Apparently not.
Is there any explanation, assuming the DNA went back to another person that's not Brian or the four brothers that people talk about, is there any explanation to not identify those individuals or to follow that lead?
You can't win if you do that. That's the only explanation that I can see.
It looks
Because you got
intentional.
two people trying to win, or I don't know. I don't know what winning looks like to them, but they're not interested. They're not interested in knowing what happened. You'd have to ask them why they're not interested in knowing what happened. But my experience is because they want to win, and they don't want to do testing that will help the other side.
And winning in this case was convicting Brian Koberger and not anybody else.
For the prosecution, certainly, I can't speak for the defense. I don't know what winning looked like to them, to the defense team, because we're through the rabbit hole with the defense team on this case. They're helping. Their only thing right now is helping the prosecution, going after their own experts for speaking the truth about exculpatory evidence. It's bizarre.
Let's not focus on getting the exculpatory evidence in front post conviction. Let's cut down our own team and discredit our own expert.
Because by trying to discredit me, they're also discrediting all the other experts who came to similar or related or corroborating findings who have reports on file. All of them.
And herself.
It's not just myself, but
I'm saying herself too. She's discrediting a lot. I don't know why you would attack your internal team.
Well, that's the question. I think that I think people are smart enough to see what's actually going on. I hope. I don't want to be the guy that blows that whistle or points that finger, but we all know who's being investigated. We do know that, and it ain't me.
Yeah, I want to understand better the DNA, and I don't know if this is beyond your scope, because as I understand it from reading Chris's book, is we have that whole the DNA on the sheath itself came back to four brothers who were not named Koberger.
Okay,
then
first, let's make it very clear. It didn't come back from the sheath. It comes back from a piece of DNA, a partial profile from the clasp, not the from the clasp. Now there's the DNA. There's no other DNA on this thing. It's clean. That's the first thing you need to understand. The second thing is DNA, and this is the big fight going on right now in the DNA community. DNA cannot give you conditions of transfer. You can't say when it got there. You can't say how it got there unless you're doing this in the context of a full reconstruction, right? So a DNA expert can't tell you how it got there or when. They can only tell you that it aligns with a particular profile in a particular way with particular statistics. That's all it can do.
So we know that there was some DNA, and it's been described as trace DNA, just a little bit found on the clasp. That was sent to Othram. Othram, they did whatever the scientists do to that, and they come up with a whole bunch of data on a file, right?
Yep.
And then the using that data, they traced it supposedly to four brothers not named Koberger, and one of those, we're told, did not want to participate, and I guess it just ended there. Then the data file was then given. Was that given to the FBI?
Or was Othram fired? Because the facts support that Othram was fired when it didn't give them the result that they were looking for and point back to BK.
Well, I would just put it another way. This is what we call expert shopping. This is very common on the side of the prosecution.
Like forum shopping.
Well, expert shopping. They're looking for the expert. They'll give them what they want. And everybody else gets left back. It's unethical. It's a problematic, and it's a Brady violation when they don't disclose it. So,
yeah. But I saw some reference that the data file, it's a discrete amount of data. You can see how big the file is. And what I remember from Chris's book is that somehow what the FBI submitted as part of the IGG or something else seems to be double the size of the file that Othram gave them.
Yeah, this is a DNA expert question. I don't want to get into the procedures or the minutiae of that because it's not my area. That's well outside of my scope. But
Was there a
Whitcomb is an expert in DNA. He used to have a DNA related company, so he knows better than I.
Did Brian have a DNA expert?
Yes.
Yeah, Bicca. She was on
Because originally she was brought in to be the DNA expert, and then she transferred over to being an attorney, and that's all public. No secrets.
I've always enjoyed listening to her.
Yeah.
She's a very smart woman.
Very smart. Becca's very smart.
So what can we expect moving forward? I mean, I guess the same question that we asked at the beginning is, how is he still in prison? Not figuratively. I think we all get that. But
yeah, he pled guilty. That's right. I mean, the answer is until somebody else is at the helm, this ship is going to stay going in this direction, and none of us are going to be able to do anything about it.
Do you think the outcome of the criminal investigation could potentially have an effect on anything in this case moving forward?
Yeah. Depends on who gets arrested.
And again, if an appellate attorney came to you, said we want to explore what options Brian still has. We know some have expired, but there's still some. You'd probably have a lot of helpful information for them, correct?
It's in my report. I mean, the thing is, what this requires is somebody to come in who has a exceptional legal mind and a lot of experience with death penalty cases to disentangle what's occurred and to assist with the investigation of the exculpatory evidence that clearly exists. Right now, that's not really the focus of what's happening. Clearly, the focus of what's happening is to try to keep the deal in place, apparently, and not disclose anything that might suggest Koberger is innocent on all sides.
I think
And that they were all sleeping.
What?
And that they were all sleeping at the time of the attacks.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, to keep that narrative going, because it's not true. That's already come out. We already know that's not true. That's
No, I'm being incredibly sarcastic.
Clearly.
People are still saying that. And as Sam says, if you can't adjust with what your narrative to what the evidence actually shows,
That's right.
then you're just trying to stick to a narrative.
That's what they're trying. They're trying to keep this deal together until the clock runs out. And I get it. I get the goal. What I don't get is the motive. That should not be. That's if an appellate attorney came to me and asked for my help, I'd give it to him without problem.
And a lot of people have been hoping that behind the scenes, maybe that's going on, but it's pretty clear that's just not in the works right now.
Can't be. Well, his attorney is still on the case. She's still running it, so can't be. What they're trying to do is keep that deal in place and keep the ship from hitting the shore. But the motive behind that, I'm unclear on. I've never understood. I haven't understood it. Still don't understand it. I have theories, but they're only theories.
Would there be consequences to Ann Taylor if the plea deal got thrown out?
I don't know.
Or, for instance, ineffective assistance of counsel?
The ineffective assistance of counsel never has consequences for the defense attorneys. That's not a thing. It's just that they screwed up. A new attorney comes in, fixes it, and they go away. Usually what happens is a defense attorney who recognizes their forced negligence by lack of funding or lack of experience or appointed, whatever it is, they will gladly come in and fall on their sword and say, hey, we didn't have funding for this. The judge wouldn't let us do that. Well, I didn't think to pursue this line of ink, whatever, they'll do it. Then there are other attorneys who will just be like, screw everybody. I did the best I could. And, I'm not incompetent at all. Doesn't matter the path they choose. They're still going to get clients. Defense attorneys can screw up every day, all day long, and they'll still have clients. Okay. There's no consequence for that. If they committed a crime or an ethical violation, they can be disbarred or criminally charged.
But it appears to me that even just the data dump that clearly was not gone over in some way. There's a lot of grounds there that she could fall on her sword in essence, couldn't she?
Well, that's a legal argument. I don't know. I mean, lots of things could happen, but that would require undoing the deal. Right now, the commitment for everyone, the prosecution and the defense, appears to be publicly that they want to keep this deal in place, both of them, to the detriment of hiding exculpatory evidence, to the point of hiding exculpatory evidence. That's the problem that I have.
Do you believe the WSU civil case has anything to do?
Yes,
With
this is definitely part of it. But that case is going to crack open so much stuff. There's going to be a civil case is not a place where you can hide stuff. Everything is going to out. The earth will give up its dead. That's what's going to happen, and the civil suit is part of that. It's part of what's going on. So, and I hate to cut it short, but it's 2.5 hours, and my mouth is killing me. So.
No worries. Dr. Turvey, on behalf of all of us and every 3,694 people watching, thank you so very much. To have a professional and such a profound professional actually speak on this case and talk about what was important when there hasn't been many that have been willing to do so. Our community needed you, and I think Brian ultimately 100% need you moving forward, but we appreciate you and we appreciate everything that you've done, and we're just really blessed to have had this time with you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Right.
And there are some brilliant creators in this chat, and I am not gonna name anybody out because last time I didn't do it perfect for everybody, but there truly are some brilliant creators that are watching and that are part of this, Dr. Turvey, that have really, really spoken very highly of you and are doing this, fighting the good fight every day to just make sure those words that matter get out there. And there's a lot of really dedicated people that have been doing this every day for 3 years plus. So thank you from all of us. And I already got you penciled in for part 2. As soon as that confidential information gets released at some point soon. But thank you very, very, very much.
Yeah, and thank you for your honesty, your candor. It was very, very nice to talk to you and to be able to get some straight answers.
I hope I helped. I just hope I helped. All right.
Thank you very much.
And we are all #Team Turvey.
Well, that's kind of you to say. And thanks to everybody for watching. I hope that they got something out of it. All right.
Thank you.
You guys take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.